Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first ResScore Resume Roast. I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Randy Gilliland. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Randy?
Gilliland.
Gilliland. My mistake. Randy is a very experienced director of development. He has a lot of experience in the public and private sector, and he came to us asking for resume advice, and while his experience was phenomenal, his resume was, in his word, a hot mess. Randy, would you kind of go ahead and give a bit of an introduction to who you are, what you've done?
Yeah, I've had the good fortune to have a lot of opportunities and in the private and public sector, in political consulting, nonprofit development, political fundraising, manufacturing, international business consulting. And so with my resume, I tried to put 30 years worth of experience into it and ended up with 5 or 6 pages. So I tried to cram everything in there, and as I said, it was a hot mess.
Now, I think you might be a little too hard on yourself, but maybe we can let the viewers be the judge. Do you mind if I share the old version of your resume?
Sure.
All right. So this is also available as a supplemental blog post, but you can see here the before version that Randy gave to us. And let's actually point out that it's multiple, as he says, multiple pages. And while it's going to be tough to read on this particular format, I forgot the backside of all these resume pages.
That was about half of it.
There was a lot to work with here. Now, we wrote up a supplemental blog post, which is linked in the notes to this video. But we're going to go ahead and walk through and talk through some of these changes that we made, because we took it from that and turned it into 2 pages. And in doing so, we had to eliminate about half the experience that was on your resume. And that was the first of the 2 big things we talked about. One was formatting. We will just hold up as a quick A/B test. It might be tough to see in the video. Which of these looks better formatted? The bulky text on the one side, or the formatting that we applied on it with a couple of small colors and borders on the other side? And then the structure of the resume. As a 5-page resume, that is very, 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 very dense. And we've done a lot of studies on how people read resumes. And what's interesting to us is that front-loading a resume, front-loading the achievements in the very first third of the first page is incredibly important. People will read resumes the same way that they make a first impression about a person. When you're walking down the street and you see somebody, within a split second, you decide if you like that person or not based on a bunch of unconscious factors: what they're wearing, what they look like, how tall they are. And then once you get the chance to talk to them, learn more about them, then what you'll do is you'll take these interactions and you will basically shape them to justify your first impression. So the same way with the resume, we think it's very important to front load the very first third of the first page with all your best experience, because that's the only chance you get. Now, the very first third of the first page of your existing resume had a lot of lengthy paragraphs describing a lot of kind of soft skills that you have. But of them, the only skill that I saw that stood out was that you've raised tens of millions of dollars for nonprofits.
Right.
The rest of it, I'll go ahead and read it. Experienced nonprofit and corporate management professional and successful entrepreneur. That's very impressive. Raised tens of millions of dollars for nonprofit and political causes. And then kind of the rest of it becomes a little bit more generic. Skilled in development and execution of strategic and tactical plans. It's probably everyone you're applying against. Adept at relationship management, partner development, et cetera, et cetera. So when we looked to change your resume, we decided to front load all this. So we initially applied a professional headline, which you had before, but we fleshed it out. We said successful entrepreneur, nonprofit development fundraiser. And as you know, when you've applied to different jobs, you've changed this particular piece based on the job you're applying to, so that you can basically get people's immediately in the frame of mind of whatever that you want them to read the resume through the lens of. Then we added proven track record of taking any task from idea to successful execution on time and within budget. And the very first bullet point, we go with raise tens of millions of dollars for nonprofits, followed by some of the other things we broke into bullet point form. So, tell us a bit about this change that we made. Do you think that we did a good job when we rewrote your resume of front loading your achievements?
Oh yeah, definitely in terms of getting the powerful points up in the first third, but also I was just absolutely amazed that you could take 5 or 6 pages and successfully into 2 pages. I tried and I just couldn't get there.
That's the toughest part. We kind of referred internally to killing your own babies. It's very tough because you've done all this amazing work, and then when you're forced to remove it from your resume, you say, I can't possibly do that. I worked so hard at that job. This was, my life's labor. How can I throw it out the window? So fortunately, we were able to be a bit more dispassionate and go through and.
You're proud of all of those. You're proud of all of those things, and you want folks to know about them.
Absolutely.
A lot of it isn't relevant to my target market, which is nonprofit development. They don't care that I built a manufacturing company.
And that was actually something I was surprised to learn. You might recall that one of the first drafts we sent you, we moved up the fact that you were a city council member and vice mayor from 2002 to 2010, which when I read that, I said, that should be leading this. That's the most impressive thing. And you actually pushed back on that. You said, actually, in the nonprofit world, that's looked upon as a kind of a downside. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, nonprofits don't like politics. So they're going to think, oh, he's a Democrat, oh, he's a Republican, he can't talk to people, with different ideological backgrounds. And the truth is, the only skill you need for running for office is to get elected. And so, I'm a political campaign professional, early in my career, so getting elected was pretty easy.
Well, that's very interesting to me. I still wonder if you might be selling yourself a little bit short on that. But when we were trying to front load that, when we thought that was useful to include, we noticed we pushed it up, and then as you pointed out that might not be an asset, I moved it to the bottom. Your point on, just to go back to your point about condensing your resume from 5 pages to 2 pages. In the accompanying blog post, we have a very nice histogram of the typical resume word count. And we basically find that the typical resume is between 400 and 900 words, and the median falls in around 600 words, which roughly is about 1 to 2 pages. And it's candidates like yourself who have a lot more experience that tend to run over. What was really interesting is when we asked experts to evaluate resumes, and we just compared this with word count, we saw roughly about a 20% decrease in the rating they gave the resume when it was longer than 900 words. So it's still possible to write a very long resume and impress people. And it's typically, again, experienced candidates that have this. But, the question we like to ask people is, would you be content to take a 20% chance less that you get the job to include these extra 3 pages at the end?
Right. That was my problem.
And then further, the thing that also is very interesting is when you condense it from 5 pages to 2 pages, you're actually eliminating the bottom half of content on your resume. You're eliminating the worst half. So in theory, if you do it right, if you're actually removing the worst bullet points, then the resume is going to be that much stronger.
Well, and what you did on formatting the whole thing, but in particular on the second page is the formatting highlighted, skill sets and aptitudes in a way that, drew your eye to them. And I thought that was very helpful.
Yeah, we will get into formatting in just a second. I want one last point about brevity, because we are preparing a separate blog post just about the concept of brevity. But there's a very interesting phenomenon called selling past the close in sales. Basically, once you've already closed the deal, if you keep yapping your mouth, you are only risking endangering the deal, right? So if you,
I know that very well from sales.
so once you've hooked them in the first third, you're actually best off having no additional information. But of course, a third of a page would be too short, so you have to fill out all the requisite details. You have to get all the experience in there. But you just be very careful, because they're not, once you've hooked them in that first front section, there's almost nothing you can do to change their mind positively, but there is a chance you could change their mind negatively. So the second half of the first page and the second page is basically filler at that point. So that's pretty interesting. On formatting, there's only a couple of quick points. Formatting is always very tough, because while there's definitely such a thing as bad formatting, there's not really such a thing as perfect formatting. It's the same if you go to a museum. You might like a painting, and someone else who's standing right next, you might say this is terrible. But there are still some basic principles that we've found through some study. One is just people don't read paragraphs. It's kind of unfortunate. I think it kind of speaks on some level to the Twitter type attention span that people have nowadays. But if a hiring manager has to read 500 resumes to pick between someone, they're looking to just get the details, and they're approaching it the same way they approach a newspaper. They're kind of skipping between the headlines, trying to get the points they want to get, and they're going to leave the paragraphs for later. So you'll notice there's a couple situations in your resume where you had paragraphs, and we converted them to bullet points, and it just looks a lot better. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And then the other thing which we tried to do was to add more white space to your resume where possible. So, for example, on this back page, you can see it's broken up very nicely. And in certain cases on your prior resume, it's just very, very blocky. And this is just a kind of a basic art science principle, which is that using some degree of white space makes it look more visually appealing. And I've yet to see the exact study on the percent of white space. I think that'd be really fascinating. But that was another thing that we tried to do with the formatting.
Yeah, yeah, it worked.
Well, thank you. Why don't you go ahead and talk to us a bit about some of your experience actually out there applying using this resume?
Well, one, I've gotten compliments about it from friends I've shared it with, and also from folks I've applied with.
That's great. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, and so folks know you helped me with my cover letter as well, and it was reasonably well written, but you really punched it up, and so actually just, I guess it was last week, a VP of development, the person who would be my boss, emailed me and told me that it was the best cover letter they'd ever seen.
That's fantastic to hear. Cover letters are very, very tricky. We often get the question, how do I write a good cover letter? And actually just branching out slightly, one of the things that we've been doing with other videos is we've been trying to communicate what we call success hacks, which is what are kind of simple systems, habits, methods that people can put into place in their career or daily life to help them with success. And when I asked you about some of your favorite success hacks, you came back with a bunch, and I'd like to discuss a lot of them, but in particular with the cover letter. Would you talk a bit about how you approach cover letters? Because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, well, one, I spend the majority of my time on research. So I read every word of their website. I look at their annual report. In the nonprofit field, there are IRS 990 forms that have all of their financial details, so I get an understanding of how large they are. If they're not large enough, it may not be somebody I want to apply with, because they're not going to have enough money to pay me. So, and it gives a breakdown of where they get their funds from. So individuals, corporate foundations, grants, I can see where their holes are, where their strengths are. So I can talk about those things in the cover letter. But also I make sure in about 3 places in the cover letter how I understand their mission and how that aligns with my values and my skills. So I make that point very heavily. And the other thing I do is I I use a couple of sentences to specifically point them to where they ought to look at the resume to confirm those things.
Yeah, I think that those are very good points. Going on the first one real quick, would it be fair to rephrase this as kind of saying that instead of focusing on yourself, you're trying to focus on them?
Yeah, they want to know what value you're going to add to the organization. So what are those strengths? And, you know, one of the things that's important to me is nobility of purpose in my work. So I'm looking for nonprofits that are in the sectors that I'm interested in, healthcare, environment, education. So I don't waste time applying to nonprofits that, you know, aren't going to get me up in the morning excited about my work.
It's so interesting because we frequently read objective statements on resumes, and about 90% of them are terrible. A lot of them say, you know, my objective is to work at a corporation that aligns with my values and, you know, improves my skill set. And when we're looking at this, we're saying that should be obvious because you wouldn't have applied to that organization if you didn't feel that that was the case. What the organization wants to know is, what can you bring me, and how can you reinforce our values? And I think what you're describing about reading through their materials and then understanding their point of view and then applying to their point of view makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I've gotten compliments on that as well.
Yeah, so I think that's just a very important point that more people should pay attention to. You know, one thing you also mentioned was treating your job search as a part-time job.
Yeah, some people say treat it as a full-time job, get up, get dressed like you're going to work. I do it in my pajamas.
You're in your pajamas right now.
No, I thought I'd dress up for you. I spend, you know, maybe 4 hours a day. And if I do it full time, it gets frustrating. I'm not as much on my game. So I'm an early morning person. So I do it, you know, between the time I get up until maybe noon. And then I spend the rest of the day doing something else. I get some exercise or read the news or, you know, do some self-reflection, a little meditation, whatever it is that I need to do that day.
Very nice. Very nice. You also, you use LinkedIn very effectively, I understand.
Yeah, I've used LinkedIn and Indeed for job postings. I prefer LinkedIn, but I use both. And one of the things I do when I'm doing the research is I'm looking at their staff and their board members to see, and then going to LinkedIn and looking them up to see if there are any mutual connections. So I can go to those connections that are, you know, first degree for me and say, you know, how well do you know this person? You know, can you put in a good word, any insight in, you know, into that person? So that's been helpful as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that this is a very powerful backdoor to getting a job. And I think you've mentioned in the past that if you are applying directly on a website, you also look to find another channel to ping them, to come at them from a couple of angles, which is, I think, a very critical skill for people.
Yeah, I don't have that great a degree of confidence that the upload of those things works very well, especially with Indeed, because it basically copies and pastes into their formatting. And I've looked at it and they get things out of sequence and, you know, it takes time to go in and edit it and get it right. So I go on the website and I track down the human resources manager or the person that I believe I would be a direct report to and get their contact information. And if it's not there, I actually make a call to the organization and see if I can get it.
Yeah, I think
and one of the things about the email too is I take my first paragraph of my cover letter and I cut and paste that in, because that's where, I'm making the case, showing I understand the vision, how that aligns with my interests. So I'm not just saying, please find attached cover letter and resume.
Yeah, especially since you get such rave reviews in your cover letter. You have to spread that as much as possible. And yeah, the company website, as you describe, it's for a lot of job boards, it's a black hole. As a quick plug, if you apply using ResScore jobs, there is no more job search black hole. We guarantee that all your resumes get read, And we do this by attaching a tracking number so you can get feedback of your application every step of the process, all the way through until you get accepted or rejected. And in some cases, you'll even get feedback on that. So just a quick plug for some of the work we're doing.
Yep.
So the last topic I wanted to talk about briefly was, you mentioned at the beginning, you have a lot of experience. And what's interesting is that, there's all kinds of discrimination in the job search. And we hope to, in future video casts, discuss some of these discrimination that people face, be it because of gender, because of race, because of sexual orientation. In your case, the discrimination that you're facing might be that you're too experienced.
Yeah, the people that would be that I'd have to direct report to, I'm qualified to do their job. They may find that a little bit threatening, which is probably an organization I don't want to be a part of. If there's someone who understands I've got this experience and they can tap into it and it's, to their best interest, that's the kind of place I'm looking for. Also, I've watched videos and webinars about this bias sort of thing. And, every one of them says, oh, ageism isn't a real thing. Well, that's not true. Ageism is a real thing. I don't know the way around it other than, I've made all the mistakes. I've got the experience to know how to work through problems and challenges more quickly than somebody who doesn't have as much experience as I have. And, it's never overt. They don't ask how old you are, but they can tell, when you graduated college.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like one of the things that you're doing by using your network on, let's say, LinkedIn, to see if you have any common connections is on some level flipping this to something of an advantage for you, because you have, with your extra experience, built up a much bigger network, and in some way you're able to use that. Do you find that this is kind of a system that you're using to counteract?
Yeah, definitely. So, that's working with, what I would call sort of a peer group, who are going to understand the advantages of experience. So I would say that's true. The other thing, when I get an interview, I ask who's going to be in the interview.
Interesting.
Is it just one person? Is it a panel? I get their names and titles, and then I look them up on LinkedIn to see if there's any connections, and then also something about their background. Did we go to the same university? Do we have, similar interests? One I was in was for an environmental group, but one of the folks in there had an arts background. So I've been on nonprofits for arts institutes. And so we were able to talk about the arts, and the other one had a tie to Hampton University, which is right here in my hometown. And I used to serve on the Town and Gown Committee, the president of the university and wife. So that was another way I could build rapport.
That's fantastic. Have you ever read the Cialdini book, The Elements of Persuasion?
I have not.
Oh, you should read it. You're taking a lot of pages right out of this book. It's a phenomenal book on basically the quantifying and breaking down the elements of persuasion, and establishing common cause is a fantastic way of doing it, which is what you're doing right there when you're trying to say, what do we have in common?
Yeah, especially in major gift fundraising, building that rapport and that trust, we need to do it very quickly. When I get into their office, I scour their office for any indications of something they like.
That's a great idea. Liking, establishing liking is a very important piece. It's one of the 6 elements of persuasion. So I find that even people who haven't read this book, just who have done a lot of fundraising, such as yourself, or sales, develop these senses naturally as a result of doing it for so long.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. We're approaching the kind of half-hour limit that we set out for this. I wish we could go on for a lot longer. Would you, go ahead and give us any parting thoughts, parting advice?
Well, for folks out there that are looking for a job, don't get frustrated. One of the things is people don't acknowledge they got your resume. If they make a decision, they don't tell you that they've made a decision. And, you know, we've all got pride and ego, so that can wound that a little bit. Be confident that you've got experience, that you're worthy, and that right job is going to come up. Just as we do in fundraising, every no is one step closer to a yes.
Very good advice. Very good advice. Thank you so much for your time. We will be following up.
Yeah, and thank you so much. You've really done a great job, and I'd highly recommend ResScore. Absolutely. I have done so.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.